Welcome to Friday. Glad to be here for another edition of the Morning Pitt Mailbag. These are always the best day of the week for me, and hopefully for you as well. I mean, I'm sure Friday is a day that you appreciate and enjoy at all times, but hopefully the mailbag is part of that. Hopefully that's part of the reason you have such a good time on Fridays is because you get it started with the Morning Pitt Mailbag. You know the deal. We take questions from Pitt fans on Panther-Lair.com, Panther-Lair.com, Pittsburgh.rivals.com. Pitt fans are always on the message boards at Panther-Lair.com, hanging out, talking about Pitt sports. And through the week, we ask them for questions, mailbag questions about Pitt football, basketball, recruiting, or anything else on their mind. And they come through as always. And they did this week, as always, with some great questions. We answer them here on the Friday edition of the Morning Pitt, which we call the mailbag, which is not a unique or interesting or, name that, somehow original name that we came up with. It's a very generic name for that piece of content, video or written or whatever it may be, where you let other people do the work for you. And that's kind of how I look at it. Rather than trying to think of topics and find things to talk about, I put it in your court, and you come up with the topics, and then we just talk about it for a little bit. So I always enjoy it. Hopefully you do as well. Let's jump into it. The Morning Pitt Mailbag here on a Friday on YouTube.com/Panther-Lair.com. Yeah, it's Friday, like I said, and we're trying to get the levels in order here. I tend to think they're pretty consistent. Somebody in the mailbag, actually, one of the questions is about the levels on the podcast. We'll actually go to this question first because, this is right off the bat. Hail to Knowledge, who has a great avatar on Panther-Lair.com. It's me killing the bottle of whiskey, I think during the Duke game last year or after the Duke game, says, will the podcast volume levels ever be stable and not jump around? Do you mean these like daily Morning Pitt videos that the levels jump around? Or are you talking about the podcast on Wednesday night or the post-game shows? I'm not sure which ones you're referring to. I tried to stay, so the software I use to record these videos each day, these Morning Pitt videos, there's a little level thing there, and I tend to keep it right around the same area. I get weird days where the levels are very low, and I try and adjust those. And then some days where the levels are very high, and I try to adjust those. And some days where the levels on me talking are fine, but that little intro music we play, sometimes I forget to adjust the levels on that. So, look, man, I'm just a talker. I'm not a sound engineer, but I'm doing my best. So if you have any, thoughtful feedback on the audio levels of these Morning Pitt videos or anything else we do, by all means, pass it along, and we'll do our best to try to give you a good quality product. I don't want it to blow up your speakers, and at the same time, I also don't want it to be impossible to hear, and hopefully not both of those things in the same podcast. Impossible to hear, so you turn the volume up, and then I figure out the levels, and boom! But anyway, there we go. We got one question already out of the way. We're only 3 minutes into this podcast, and we've already finished one question. But hail to Knowledge, thank you for contributing to the mailbag, and thank you for using a picture of me slamming a bottle of whiskey as your avatar on Panther-Lair.com. Don't forget to check out the site, Panther-Lair.com, Pittsburgh.rivals.com for all the Pitt sports news you can possibly handle. And then, of course, the message boards, like I talked about. That's where Pitt fans hang out all the time. It's the best online community of Pitt fans that you're going to find. All day, every day, Pitt fans are hanging out and talking about Pitt sports on the Panther-Lair.com message boards. If you're a Pitt fan, you want to talk to other Pitt fans, the best place to do it is at Panther-Lair.com, Pittsburgh.rivals.com. You know what else I think also about the levels? I think I move around a lot. So I might sit back like this, and then maybe, does that make the levels go down? It definitely makes me look weird on the screen. It looks like I'm a shrunken head, like the guy at the end of Beetlejuice, the first one. But then sometimes I might lean in too close, and then it gets, or maybe I lean off to the side. Maybe that, I bet that does the levels bad. I got to keep all these things in mind. I got to think about it, A lot of strains keeping the old duder's head here this morning. All right. Don't forget to like this video and subscribe to youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com so you get all of the Pitt video content, these daily Morning Pitt videos, our weekly live stream that we do every Wednesday night, and then, of course, our post-game shows. We will be live after the Virginia game tomorrow night. Panthers take on Virginia at Acrisure Stadium for an 8 p.m. kickoff, which means it's going to be very late for the postgame, but it will happen. We will be live after Pitt, Virginia to talk about everything we saw in that game, to drink a little whiskey, and talk a little Pitt football. What combination could be better than that? So make sure you tune in tomorrow night. If you want to make sure you don't miss the live stream, hit the subscribe button, turn on notifications. You'll get an alert sent to your phone every time we go live. First question of the day comes from A.S. Daniels. Says, Chris, I got a subscription to the Lair for my birthday a few years back. This year I got the 13 to 9 book. What type of season would it take to write another book? Any thoughts or topics? I'm hoping to have more birthdays. Yeah. I hope you have a lot more birthdays too. A couple of things about the 13 to 9 book. And that's awesome that you got a copy of it. I'll say right off the bat that you talk about like what kind of season would it take? Obviously, if Pitt were to have some magical dream season, national championship or something, that would merit a book and a deeper investigation, maybe even a run to the playoffs. But the thing about 2007, the season that inspired that book, and when I first put it out, when I first wrote it, it was 2017, so 7 years ago. There were a few people I know, came up to me and like, you really wrote a book about a 5-7 team, and like. Yeah, I did, because the thing was, it wasn't just that they beat West Virginia that year. It was the whole story of the season. It was Dave Wanstead's third year. You were finally looking forward to progress, and pretty much from the beginning, just weird, bizarro things happening. From Pat Bostic leaving the team in August during training camp, Bill Stahl gets hurt, all kinds of weird outcomes in games. I think there was an onside kick attempt to start the Virginia game. There was the end of that Navy game. There was the phantom offensive pass interference that kind of killed them in the Rutgers game. LaShawn McCoy fumbles at the goal line in the Louisville game. The USF game, their defense plays pretty well, and they still give up like 38 points because of like 2 pick sixes and another interception that went down to the 2 or something. I mean, like, there were all these weird hard luck outcomes. And mixed right in the middle of it all was a win over Cincinnati that stood up until like a month and a half later as the best win of the Dave Wanstead era. And I think still it's overlooked as one of the better wins and best wins of the Dave Wanstead era, but it really was. Cincinnati was ranked that year at that point when Pitt beat them at home. And it pulled them out of a tailspin that they were. And so anyway, I don't need to go through the whole story of the 2007 Pitt-Cincinnati game, but that season was full of storylines. And it was a team that really did just keep getting kicked down and over and over again. And they kept battling back, and they had LaShawn McCoy, which was an exciting guy, and the Wildcat offense, and they went out to Michigan State. As a matter of fact, there was just so many storylines in that season, and then to have it culminate with one of the biggest wins in Pitt history, regardless of season implications or anything like that. I mean, it was a gigantic win to keep your arch rival out of the national championship. I mean, when you're 28-point underdogs, when you got, boat raced by them the previous 2 seasons, to go down there, you're 4-7, you're in a terrible situation. Like, you were supposed to get killed. You had no business winning that game. But then the way you won that game, the way Pitt won that game, was really sort of a culmination of everything they had done all season. McCoy, the defense, the emerging defense, the lack of a passing game. I mean, it was all in that game. And it was like that game summed up everything that had happened in the season and kind of said, look, this is what it's all been building toward. And it sort of felt like a reaffirmation of the Wanstead era overall, because if they lose that game, they go 4-8 after going 5-6 and 6-6. There was a lot. I don't want to say there was a lot riding on that game, but there were a lot of storylines going into it. And that's probably the best way to say it, is that there were a lot of storylines in that game, and there was a lot of storylines in that season, and for it to end the way it did after the season that they had, I think merited a little bit more, a deeper examination. And quite frankly, I think the book fell way short of that. I don't think it was, like a proper book about that season would be twice as long as that book ended up being. I mean, that book was basically a series of extended essays stretched out to be a 100-page book or something like that. I'm not like trying to be falsely humble about it. It's disappointing because it should be much better. It should tell much more of a story. But so your question of what would it take for another, to be inspired to write another book or something? I mean, it would have to be a season that gets to a national championship, or a season that has that kind of richness and depth of storylines that the 2007 season had. It can't just be one good game. Like, I don't know if the 2021 season really would merit a book, at least from me. But a season like 2007 or a season that all ends with the ultimate goal being achieved. That's what it would take. But yeah, here's to you having more birthdays though, for sure. Berg B says, what storylines are you looking forward to following with Allen Greene in his first year as Pitt's athletic director? What do you think Pitt fans should hope or expect to see in terms of NIL progress in the first year on the job? So I thought this was an interesting question, and I looked a little bit, and I actually think Allen Greene is going to have some interesting contract decisions coming up here. There are, by my count, 4, and I didn't look through every sport at Pitt, but there are 4 sort of prominent sports head coaches whose contracts will be coming due in 2027, which is not next year. It may not be something that needs to be addressed right now, but it is something to keep on the radar. Dan Fisher is extended through 26-27. Keith Gavin is under contract through 2027. Randy Waldrum, the women's soccer coach, is under contract through 2027. Mike Bell, the baseball coach, is under contract through 2027. Those decisions don't need to be made right now, but you may want to look. I mean, so this is the 24-25 season, right? So by the end of this year, or this is the 24 season, by the end of this year, Dan Fisher's going to have 2 years left on his deal. Might want to look into extending that. You might want to get ahead of that. More pressing than those guys, though, is Jay Vidovich, the men's soccer coach. A program that spent time as the number 1 team in the country, is under contract through 2025 season, which means that's going to be one that's a little bit pressing. Panaruzzi, Jeff Capel, you've got them under contract through 2030, so you're not under a lot of urgency there. But do you get Jay Vidovich re-signed? How soon do you move on Dan Fisher and Randy Waldrum? And then I think you're probably going to have to make decisions about Keith Gavin and Mike Bell. I think Gavin, his program's had more success than Bell's program has had, but those will be programs that decisions are going to have to be made. So those will be interesting storylines to watch. NIL is going to be at the forefront, as well as how Pitt handles revenue sharing and some of the changes in scholarship limits or lack thereof with a few sports. I think with NIL storylines or expectations, I think what you're looking for is just generally, how does the athletic department embrace NIL efforts? How does the athletic department enhance NIL efforts? How does the athletic department forward the goals of Pitt's collective and NIL fundraising efforts? That's going to be, and I think that's something you'll see. That's something you should experience as a fan, is increased communication from the school about NIL, increased publicity and public efforts, with regards to NIL. And you should see those things. And as much as Pitt can possibly do to forward those efforts and forward those goals and help the collective meet those goals and help these programs have the resources they need in order to win, a lot of those things, not all, but a lot of those things are going to be very public. And I think you'll be able to see them, and you should be able to see them. And I think it's in everyone's best interest to make those efforts as public as possible, to show Pitt fans that this is a real thing being officially endorsed, and they should get on board as well. And so those are a few things I'm kind of interested in and looking forward to seeing out of Allen Greene's first year. Special Sauce has a great question. Which one happens first? Pitt football making the 12-team playoff, or Pitt basketball making the Elite Eight? And I saw this question, and I was like, oh, God, I'm going to probably waffle on that one. Wish-wash my way through about 2.5 or 3 minutes and then move on to the next question. But I actually think I think Pitt Hoops making the Elite Eight is probably so what's the question? The question is which one happens first? I would say which one has a greater chance of happening first or greater likelihood of happening first. It would be Pitt basketball making the Elite Eight. And there's a lot of reasons for that. I mean, I think most people would tell you, look, you can achieve success in basketball with 1 or 2 great players. It takes more to do it in football. You also have a great opportunity to sort of play your way into that elevated area. If you want to get to the Elite Eight, you have to make the tournament. But once you do that, it's pretty much up to you how far you get. To make the college football playoff, it's up to you. Obviously, if you could just run the table and win your conference championship, then you're fine. But if you find yourself out of contention for the conference championship game, or even like Pitt is right now, not controlling your own destiny with regards to the conference championship game, with 4 games still left to play, Pitt does not control its own destiny for getting into the conference championship game. And so, if you find yourself in that position and you're not in the Big Ten of the SEC, you're sort of wondering, that there's only so much control that you have, and 1 or 2 losses can put you certainly on the outside and potentially with no chance to get in. So like Pitt right now is 7-1, right? If they run the table, they go 11-1. They run the table the rest of the way and go 11-1. They should probably make the top 12. But the fact that we even say it as they should probably, that we say that we don't say it's a guarantee, that we don't say it's a sure thing. Well, if they run the table, they're in. That speaks right there to the challenges of making the college football playoff unless you win your conference and win your conference with a 1 or 2 loss record. So, well, no, unless you win your conference. I mean, we don't have to add the 1 or 2 loss record. I mean, winning the conference is the key. So I would say, because I think Pitt basketball is going to make the tournament with a fair amount of regularity and consistency over the next few years, and potentially give themselves a chance to win their way into to the Elite Eight, I would say Pitt basketball has a greater chance of making the Elite Eight than Pitt football has of making the college football playoffs. SV Pig 1 says, based on how past Pitt players have done in the portal, not so great. Do you expect that trend to continue for the starters, or do you see it slowing down? I know some movement is normal. No, I mean, I think you'll probably see a starter or 2 go every year, to be honest. And some of that, most of it is because they'll have an opportunity to make more money elsewhere. And I don't say that as a reflection on Pitt's collective or their NIL efforts, but we've said a lot of times, most of these guys that you see that stick at Pitt do so at a discount. And so if there's a guy who says, well, I want to get the most I can possibly get, they're probably going to find an opportunity to do so elsewhere. Now, there will always be guys like, take your pick of starters this year who decided to come back, returning starters from a year ago who decided to come back despite having good offers to go other places. And I think that will always be the majority for Pitt. But there's always going to be a few who get away. I don't know if there are guys on this year's roster, starters on this year's roster, who get offers in the offseason and look at it and say, well, Solomon DeShields didn't play much, or Bengali Kamara transferred after a short amount of time, and then that influences them. I would say for the most part, if they're going to chase the money, then they'll chase the money and probably not be motivated too much by, because even Kamara and DeShields didn't play as much. Deion Hayes and Sam Okunlola are playing a lot. So I think, Jordan Addison played a lot. Some of these guys, I would say, if they're going to go for the money, they'll go for the money. And I don't know if there's any cautionary tales that would change their mind. Maybe 1 or 2 guys, but probably if there's a guy who's going to go for the money, they'll go. Left Coast Panther says, who's the left guard in 2025? That's an interesting question. Maybe a guy like Caleb Holmes is ready to play as a redshirt freshman. I think he's going to be really good. Maybe a guy, maybe Ryan Coretta is ready to step in as a starting left guard, and maybe this is the most likely option, the starting left guard in 2025 isn't on the roster yet. I think offensive line is going to be and has to be a priority in the transfer portal. At least 1 guy, if not 2. I think they're going to need to bring in some help to shore up that group. I would assume they're not going to get Branson Taylor back, which means they're going to need to they're going to have to shore up the group. And I think maybe they have some potential on the roster, but I think they've got to get. I think there are a couple key areas that they're going to need to focus on. They're going to focus on in the transfer portal, and I think the offensive line is going to be one of them. J-Town Panther fan says, how much emphasis do you think should be placed on Eli's first half performance against Virginia? Do you feel if he struggles, do you look to Yarnell for that spark in the second half? I think there's a lot of different sort of caveats or conditions to this question. If Eli Holstein throws 3 interceptions in the first half, then yeah, maybe you make a change. If Eli Holstein is mediocre or average in the first half, but Pitt's winning, they probably stick with him. If Eli Holstein's mediocre or average in the first half and Pitt's losing, well, maybe there's more of a decision to make. My guess and prediction would be he won't throw 3 interceptions in the first half and probably won't get benched. My guess and my prediction is that they're going to stick with him. And personally, I kind of think as long as he's not turning the ball over, I think you keep going with him and working with him and trying to help him develop and grow. You'd like to think that Eli Holstein and Cade Bell learned quite a bit from the last 3 games, and are improving. You'd like to think that Eli Holstein's going to keep getting better, and that the best way for him to do that is to keep playing. So, I mean, my guess is we'll keep seeing Holstein. I kind of think he's bound to take a step back in the right direction, or in the positive direction, and be a little bit closer to what he was in the first 5 games. I'd like to think, and I think you'd like to think, that after 3 games of seeing similar defensive approaches, Cade Bell and his staff will have a better plan for how to attack it in this game on Saturday night, because you've seen it now, and even if it's not what Virginia usually does, you can probably bet that that's what they're going to do until you show that you can attack it and take advantage of it and show that you can beat it. And so I'd like to think that they're all smart enough to figure those things out and come out with a better plan and execute it against Virginia. Let's see. Smenges at 4:30 a.m. he posted this, so I appreciate you trying to get after it. Is Cade Bell's offense the same or similar to the Tennessee or any other Power 4 offenses, or limitations from it being 1 year and or a young and patchwork offensive line responsible for recent struggles? I don't know about offensive comparisons to other teams. I'm not smart enough to tell you who runs this kind of offense. I mean, you could talk about tempo, but in terms of the actual structure of the offense, I'm not going to pretend like I have a good answer on that. In terms of the struggles this year, I mean, I think there's a lot of factors. One, yeah, they've had some turnover on the offensive line due to injuries, and that is always going to be an issue. They've got a redshirt freshman starter at quarterback, and that you're going to have your ups and downs. Like I've talked about all season, there's going to be strikes and gutters. There's going to be steps forward and steps back, and there were a lot of steps forward in the first 5 games, but they weren't all steps forward in those first 5 games. There were points where Eli Holstein struggled in those first 5 games, and so you got what you would expect to get out of a redshirt freshman quarterback. I think, to some extent, I think Cade Bell has had to adjust as well. I think there are times where this offense maybe doesn't put enough emphasis on getting the ball to the guys who are the best players on the team. You know what I mean? Like Kanate Mumfield and Kenny Johnson, I think, should be far and away the top 2 targets in the passing game on this team, with Desmond Reed right there with them, because I think those 3 guys are the best offensive players this team has. The 3 best skill players that this team has: Johnson, Mumfield, and Reed. But there's a whole lot of time, and understanding you can't just give the ball to those 3 all game long, but there's a whole lot of times where those guys don't seem to be utilized as much as they probably should. And so there's lots of factors. Defenses have adjusted to this offense and to these players over the course of the season, and Pitt has to adjust back. At the same time, the offensive line is what it is. At the same time, you've got a redshirt freshman. So, I mean, there's a lot of factors. I don't know if there's one thing, as always. It's never just one thing, and I think that's the case with the offense. Last question is the Kenny Pickett effect. Have you gotten a gobble-a-rito yet? Confession here. It's 2024. I've lived in this city for 17 years. I've been eating at Mad Max pretty much for all 17 of those years. I've never had a gobble-a-rito. Never did it. Because when I went to Mad Max, I just wanted a Mad Max burrito. I didn't want turkey and gravy and all that stuff. I went to Mad Max for Mad Max food. The wings. Some of my favorite wings in the city, I wanted chips and salsa. I wanted a Mad Max burrito because I love the Mad Max burritos. So the gobble-a-rito never really had that much appeal for me. And then, of course, 4 years ago, I had to start eating gluten-free, so I can't eat a Mad Max burrito anymore at all. So what are you going to do? But yeah, I never had one. And it still doesn't, I'm not sitting here being like, dang, I never had a gobble-a-rito. What a miss on my part. I don't really feel like I missed anything. It's a burrito with turkey and gravy and stuffing and just give me Thanksgiving dinner. All right, that's we got through all our questions, or at least all the questions as of the time we taped this thing. So thanks everybody who submitted questions in the mailbag at Panther-Lair.com. If you want to be part of the mailbag next week, just go over to Panther-Lair.com, Pittsburgh.rivals.com. Look for our mailbag post. Probably on Tuesday is when we try to put it out there. submit your question and be part of the mailbag right here on youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. Thanks, as always, for contributing questions. Thanks for watching. Make sure you like this video and subscribe to youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. I hope you've had a great week. Enjoy your Friday. Enjoy all day Saturday tomorrow. And then Pitt, Virginia tomorrow night, 8 o'clock at Acroshore Stadium. Live show after the game, probably around 1 a.m. We will be live. And it should be interesting. No matter what happens, we know it will be interesting. So thanks for tuning in today. We appreciate it. Have a great rest of your day. Enjoy your weekend. And we'll talk to you tomorrow night for the live show, live post-game show right here at youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com.